Welcome to the MindBod Adventure Pod, where every week we dive into a different practice, a different perspective on life, and you try it out with us. Join us on Substack at mindbodpod.com to watch this episode as a video podcast. And if you want to support our crazy adventures and get fun perks and exclusives along the way, join us as a paid subscriber. Now, onto this week's adventure.
Okay, welcome Stephen Porges and Karen Onderko to the MindBod Adventure Pod. I am your host, Jeff Warren, and with me here is...
I'm Tasha Schumann.
Tasha Schumann. So, oh man, very excited. Very excited. This is a huge moment for us, I would say for me in particular, because I'm talking to two people who've had a direct impact on my family life. If you don't know Stephen Porges, well, you will shortly, but you almost certainly do in the background somehow, because he's the visionary scientist behind polyvagal theory, which we'll get into, which has been massively influential in the whole trauma world and beyond as just a way of thinking about the nervous system. And with him is his co-author, Karen, who they've just written a book about something called the Safe and Sound Protocol, of listening protocol, where the frequencies are treated to create safety in the system. And it has been working for my son, who's got a lot of intensity and challenge. And I'm just amazed by this. So this is going to be a whole opportunity to talk about polyvagal theory, to talk about safety in the nervous system, how the Safe and Sound Protocol works, but even the deeper principles. And we're even going to guide some practices and have Stephen critique them or in a loving way from a polyvagal lens.
It's not critique, it's deconstruct. There's very different.
We have some commentary on what's going on from a polyvagal lens.
Yes. This is a real privilege, friends. We don't get a chance to hear Stephen often talk about this, and to have Karen here too. So welcome, friends, to the MindBod Adventure Pod.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting us.
Yep. Thank you. Looking forward.
So for our listeners who may not be familiar with you or your work, or, they've heard polyvagal theory or vagus nerve, tell us kind of, in plain speak, what it is you've created.
What is this thing you've unleashed upon the world?
Yes.
Oh, it's the most intuitive, natural thing that everyone knows. It's that when your physiology shifts, so does your behavior, and so does your perspective of the world. So when you get kind of like dysregulated or hyper-aroused, or people might call it anxious, the world looks different to you, you react different to it, and people react differently to you. So it's really the acknowledgement that our behavior is not solely intentional. And so when people are anxious and we say, don't be anxious, it's not going to work. It's like saying that if you're depressed, you have everything to live for. Does that work? Or if you're grieving, what people want to be, they want to be near someone so they can grieve. They don't want to be told you have everything to live for. Keep moving. So the issue is we all know that our bodily states, our biobehavioral states, influence how we interact, how we experience the world. But too often we are put into situations, whether it's educational, whether it's political, religion, social, family, in which we are literally being told not to feel our bodies and not to, in a sense, honor and respect that. And we end up modifying our body to deal with the constraints of our environment. We downregulate our bodily feelings and we become numb to the world. And we'll talk about this because there are consequences, including health consequences, of numbing the system when the body is trying to scream at you and tell you, I'm not comfortable right now. Get me in a safe place.
So you kind of came out with polyvagal theory in 1994, was it? 94? Yeah. And I remember encountering it when I was, doing my specialist degree in 2002 or something like that. It was still like a new idea. And now, it's been in the culture for so long that any body worker, meditation instructors, we all kind of have a sense of it and apply it in our own ways. But what was the landscape like before? What was the conversation about trauma, about bodily states before 1994?
I would say before 94, and it's still pretty prevalent in many places, our mental world was viewed as a cognitive intentional world. So like clear your mind, which is part of a meditative process. You don't just clear your mind. You basically have to not think about your mind and maybe it will clear. So there are all these paradoxes about using verbal instructions to get into certain states. And what polyvagal theory was all about was understanding and respecting this very unique nervous system that we inherited as a social mammal. And where did that come from? It really came from the linkage between our viscera, the nerves that regulate our gut and our heart, as part of our social behavior. So we ingest, we smile, we talk, we kiss. All these things are, it says, using portals to the, in a sense, vagal system, the autonomic nervous system, to calm our bodies down. So the key that we'll be talking about is how intonation of voice. And of course, as medicators or group leaders of medication, you know the power of intonation of voice. But polyvagal theory didn't just say it's powerful. It said it's powerful because we inherited a sensitivity to a certain modulation of frequencies that signal safety to our body. And that's what mothers do to their babies. And that's what even fathers do to their pets. I won't say they do it to their babies. But the notion is we intuitively know what to do, and our pets and our children and our spouses and our colleagues. And in your world, the people who will tune in, who basically are pulled in by your voices, which are very modulated, are getting the signal of safety.
What we're basically talking about is the art and science of tuning the human nervous system, of making these adjustments to change the state so that people then experience reality differently and have very different sets of behaviors. Because I mean, I'm thinking in particular, like this question around how things used to be through the prism of like children's development. You know, when children were acting out, it was all about trying to modify the behaviors. You try to address the behaviors, get them to act in some different way. But what your insight is, well, no, wait, those behaviors are happening because there's a baseline state that's determining those behaviors. So the emphasis should be on how to shift the state.
Yeah, well, this is an interesting question because I did early research in autism and in hyperactivity. And in that world, it was very behaviorally oriented. And the part of my research, and this is really, I'm writing this story of my own professional life, and that was the introduction of physiological state as an individual difference, as literally the root of polyvagal theory. And that individual difference was the measuring of heart rate variability, which was really a index of that neuroregulation of the vagus. And if you had a lot of vagal regulation, you had a lot of resilience, and you could regulate. Now, I want to flip back because you brought up something very important, and that is I was invited to give a B.F. Skinner invited speech at the ABAI, the international meeting of these groups. And what was my talk about? My talk was about you can do your job as an ABA person much better and actually very well if you take an interest in the physiological state of the child, because it's that intervening variable that is actually interfering. And the ABA people know that it's almost impossible to use behavior modification techniques to calm, because the priority when you're in a state of threat, the tantrum, is survival, and the inhibition of cognition just will lose. So that's why timeouts and rooms start to come in. They allow the physiology to actually play out, because the rewards, the reinforcements, which was deep in the model, the reason you can't control the behavior is you haven't found the effective reinforcer. That was what they were taught. And that's not the true story. If you can modify the physiological state, then the reinforcers are varied. You can do a lot. And what we learned in our own lives, I'm looking at 3 other people who are on journeys as well, is what has been the main reinforcer? Curiosity and connection, and reducing the burden of suffering from others. If you take those things, those are our reinforcers. So we can create that narrative as well. But the reality is the reinforcers, or the actions that we do, make us feel better. We feel good inside ourselves. And that's what polyvagal theory did. And if we want to go back to 94, go back to 1970 or the late 60s when I was in grad school, when you couldn't study emotion, emotion was not a valid area of research. It had to be framed into something called motivation. Because in animals, you could literally put them on food deprivation that made them motivated. So that's how they kind of studied these processes. But internal bodily feelings did not have a place in science. They were viewed as optional. And what polyvagal theory says is not optional. It's obligatory to understand and to respond to your physiological state.
Karen, how did you come to this work? What was your initial interest in polyvagal or the eurekas that happened for you?
Well, I did a mid-career right-hand turn or left-hand turn. I don't know which direction it was, but I was in finance for 17 years before I became fascinated by neuroplasticity and neuroscience. And I went back to school at the University of Colorado and studied that and was in a lab studying executive functioning, essentially, the things that improved it and the things that worsened it. And the PI of this lab, Jim Grigsby, terrific man, was polyvagal informed. And so we were looking at the physiological states that would improve or worsen executive functioning. So that's how I learned about polyvagal theory. And after some time in that lab, I realized that being a researcher wasn't really my calling, nor was finance. And I read about a company called Integrated Listening Systems that had a listening and movement therapy called the Total Focus System. And there was a chapter in a book written by Norman Doidge, who also was the one who kind of got me interested in neuroplasticity, called The Brain's Way of Healing. Terrific book. And this company was highlighted in that book. And so I sought out a job there. And then the founder and I reached out to founder of that company, Randall Redfield. Randall and I reached out to Steve Porges to see if polyvagal theory might explain why that therapy was so effective.
And it turns out it had a lot to say about that.
Turns out it had something to say about it. But not only that, we actually traveled to North Carolina to sit with Steve in his living room to talk about this, to do a podcast. And through the conversation, which was long and wandering, and we talked about lots of things, I think we came to a point where Steve was willing to say that he had been developing a therapy of his own, and it had been hiding in plain sight for years. And here we came to talk about our therapy, but he was happy to reveal that he had been working on one of his own, which turned out to be what's now called the Safe and Sound Protocol.
So let's talk a little bit about that then. This is a therapy, a modality that you basically developed where children and adults can listen to music. And we've actually featured this on the show before. We talked about it with Paula, but they can listen to music. And through that listening, you're basically settling the system to connect to a particular kind of state. So can you say a little bit about that? And I'm happy to say a little bit about my experience with my son and what that has looked like too.
I'll just start, then I really want to hear your story. But basically, it was to take literally vocal music, this is how it started, and to take it with the knowledge of what frequencies the nervous system is looking for to calm and relax, and basically put filters or basically process the music to emphasize those frequencies and literally to dampen everything else out. And so it's not necessarily beautiful music, but the body can't help but react and respond to it. So in a sense, people don't even know what's going on, but suddenly they may turn and look at the other person and smile. And it could be a child who's autistic who never makes eye contact, and they will reflexively. I was working with a 42-year-old adult, and he went through the 5-hour sessions in my lab. And I walked in at the end of the 5th hour. He turns towards me, puts out his hand, and says, "Good morning, Dr. Porges." And this was a person who talked to his father like this at 90 degrees. And what I realized was that these are literally reflexes. The body cannot help but become accessible. And this became also a very interesting journey. So that accessibility is what we're talking about, accessible for co-regulation. And this works really beautifully unless accessibility is interpreted by the nervous system as vulnerability. And now it circles back into adversity history. And now the trauma therapists with this tool have been able to enable people through titration to recover this system and to, in a sense, feel safe in their bodies again.
Yeah. Well, so what it's looked like just practically, if someone's interested in this, is you first find an OT or a child. If you got a kid, say, with behavioral issues or challenges, or someone with ADHD, or often like you began working with autistic kids, where your career started. So you have this, or you're an adult with trauma or who knows what. You find a practitioner, first of all, who can help with that. And this is one of the tools the practitioner uses, is this listening protocol. So you get an app, which is called Unite, which my friend Jason does, which is hilarious. So we know Jason, but he has his app Unite, and the OT, say in my case, it was an OT, set us up with this thing that works on our app. And then I just take the phone and I put it through a Bluetooth speaker, and my little guy is just playing or he's coloring. And I'm just playing this music in the background, and it's classical music, and you can't tell anything's been done to it. He's not paying any attention to it. I'm not, I'm kind of paying attention to it because I'm watching him, but it's just at a certain, it's not too loud. And I might play 15 or 20 minutes, or it depended. At the beginning, it was less. And then it sort of stops, and he doesn't know anything's really happened. But what we noticed, and the very first time this happened, it was the most dramatic, but other times it would happen again. But the very first time, it was actually his OT in the office that was playing it. And we got home that night, and we'd been having all these challenges with him at bedtime. We still have some challenges. It's a process. But he was calm at dinner. He asked, he offered to go get his little brother's stuffed animal when he noticed his little brother was a little bit distressed, which never happened. He was making contact. Like, he was like looking at me, and there was just this easy sense of being regulated and being together as a family that we had been really missing. I mean, we were in a really hard place with our family. It was like very, very, very challenging at home. And so this was like 10 minutes or something that he, and so we were, after that, my partner and I were like, okay, there is something going on here. And so we eventually brought the listening protocol home, and we went through the whole session of the SSP, and he's definitely more regulated and chill. He's still got his stuff. And so now we're using this other protocol that you have around, a listening protocol for resting at night, that's helping him settle. But it's been really interesting. So that was my report, and I've got the godfather of polyvagal here to tell me what was happening, like what happened in his system. And people may not even know what the vagal nerve is or what vagal anything is, although these days I'd be surprised, but maybe that's a place to say something.
Let's talk about what the vagus is. It has gotten a lot of press, and part of it is a misdirection. So they basically have attributed executive function or causality to a nerve. A nerve is a wire. And the vagus is really a bidirectional superhighway connecting the brainstem with your visceral organs, with the organs in the body. So it's really evaluating. It's a surveillance system of what your body is doing, and it's going up to your brain, and your brain is interpreting it at this low level. And if the brain interprets the body as being dysregulated, it's really preparation for threat. And so the brainstem is really regulating either homeostatic health, growth, and restoration, or it shuts that down to prepare for threat or mobilization. And if you're involved in stress or mental effort, it shuts that down as well. So many people who quote, work hard in an office, they become autonomically, physiologically dysregulated from those behaviors, from those experiences.
So because they get dissociated from their own body, they stop noticing the signals.
Yeah, let's stick with that important word, dissociate from their own body. And that is the natural outcome of suppressing the communication of the body to the brainstem through the vagus. So you're down-regulating that feedback loop, and that creates the dissociation. And that works fine because you don't feel pain, you can work harder. And I would just want the audience to recognize that, in a sense, that's the mandate that we're all given. Sit there longer, work a little harder, don't give in to your bodily feelings, just inhibit and just do. I mean, even the Nike one, just do it. And so we're missing really what our body is saying to us. And over time, we're learners. We won't hear our body, and then there's consequence. So it's not merely I don't feel my body. It's that the feedback loops are not surfacing my body. So now you start getting all these, quote, psychosomatic or medically unexplained, quote, functional disorders, gut problems, cardiovascular problems, even things like skin problems and inflammatory responses. So our body, in a sense, is
mental health problems. Mental health. I mean, that's massive.
Yeah. So the issue is we're a society that is literally not only told not to calm, it's told to work harder. And just think about the environment that we're in now, which was first we went through COVID, which was a threat to our nervous system. So much so that we lost co-regulation with others for a number of years. And many kids didn't have the socialization processes of going to school. Then now we have this political turmoil, which is predictable when you have nervous systems that are under threat. They reframe what the world looks like to them. That's polyvagal theory. If your body's in a sense of threat, you see the world as threatening.
And that's what it seemed like was happening. Our son was in a kind of chronic defensive posture where everything was a threat to him. He was constantly, everything causes him to freak out. Yeah. And the difference we noticed was that dropped. So there's really three states we're talking about. There's a state of being sort of dissociated. There's a state of being like fight, flight, activated. And then there's a state of being just regulated and connected.
Yeah, it gets more nuanced than that because, like, play can have a lot of movement and running, but people's faces are smiling and their voices are a good state. So it's that engagement, what we call the ventral vagal circuit, or I call the social engagement system, which is the muscles of the face and head. And you know when a person is authentically happy versus the fake smile. And again, we were talking about behavior mod earlier. There was a time when autistic individuals were literally reinforced to smile, and they would do things like this, basically use the muscles of the upper part of the face. And the issue is we detect the accessibility and authenticity of a person by their voice, we do by the use of the muscles of the upper part of their face, because that's linked to the muscles, the nerves that control our ear, the middle ear muscles that enable us to pull in human voice. And that's linked to the vagal regulation of our viscera, calms us down. So actually, I'd like Karen to talk about a lot of these interesting examples, because the journey of our book on Safe and Sound Protocol was a joint journey in which we start to get the feedback, like your feedback. And I said to Karen, keep track of these. There's a book in this.
Yeah, we really were flooded when we released the SSP. But I want to go back to Jeff, your son's experience. You said that on the very first day of listening, something happened, and that night he was calm. He went to bed easily, and he was kind to his brother. Can just focus on him for a second. There was something that shifted in his body. Steve was saying, you like to have this genuine, authentic smile, and you feel differently. Well, the felt sense of safety can be like a new experience for a young body. And if he had been like anxious or dysregulated beforehand, to have a new sensation in his body must have just washed over him like I don't know, something terrific, like a rainbow. And we received so many stories when the SSP was just being released of things like that. In fact, one girl who was about 7 years old did the SSP for the first time. First time she listened, at her first listening segment, she told her father, "My stomach has a smile with eyes that blink very happy."
That's so sweet.
Imagine what a little 7-year-old girl is thinking, like how that must feel to evoke such a description like that. So it's a felt sense. It's a very physical thing that happens. And we've been talking about, all the effects, and it's important to like stop and think, okay, this makes your body feel different. When you feel safe, you really can sit in your chair, you feel your body, and you're present. And that has a physical sensation to it.
But then he would do more, and sometimes we wouldn't get that response, or a little bit of it and not that much. And it's like, it's a process.
Yeah. Is there like a habituation to it too? Because like that happened kind of immediately, and you're saying that after a while it's more playing, or
don't think of it as habituation. Think of it as a neural exercise, that the nervous system is being challenged by doing this. It's unfamiliar territory. And so over time, it starts getting resolved. And so like when we first start doing this in my lab, the main effects didn't occur immediately after. They were occurring 1 month later. In a sense, the individual had to get used to those feelings. And one of the things that changed was food curiosity. So if like some kids will always eat the same thing. And then what you find out is they get used to their body, and then they get ingestively curious. They want to eat different things, not just French fries, pizza, or toasted cheese sandwiches, or cheese tacos, which is the grab food. Now, I also have a personal story. I was developing this and using my younger son to help me do this. And he listened for 10 minutes, and he was a gaze averter and a mumbler, couldn't understand what he was saying. And he never made eye contact. He had, a lot of these soft features. So he listens to it. I brought it home, and he listens for 10 minutes. He comes down. He comes right up to me, close to my face, and talks to me eye to eye, face to face, in perfect articulation. Shocked me. Exactly. I was like, what's going on here? I literally hit the floor or laughed. It was like too much. And then he starts with, he's a very bright individual. He starts to explain what it's doing. And unlike the young lady that you described, Karen, he comes up with a very nuanced brain area type of explanation, which had nothing to do with what we were doing. But the point was that it just got triggered. And this is why I start to, in a sense, pull back from terms like neuroplasticity and talk about state shifts, that you can shift the state. And the nervous system has to get used to now being in that state. Now, what was interesting about him, he was very gifted in math. He was at all these advanced programs in the summers. And after this, he lost interest in math. He got interest in people, and he went into journalism.
Wow.
And he makes movies now. So it's kind of a remarkable journey of finding himself and what he found, what he wanted to do with his life. So the issue is people are telling us what's going on inside of them. And I had a 4-year-old who was so hypersensitive to headphones, had to put it in speakers. And I had a sound cube. And this 4-year-old with very, very limited language goes into the cube where the music is playing and says, safe.
Oh, wow.
So this is the point where people know what they're experiencing and they're putting language to it. What we learn, and there was a study we did in the past few years looking at mothers' voices and seeing what frequencies they were using to calm their babies after this is Edtronic still face paradigm, where the mother plays with the child that freezes her face. The child then gets kind of irritable or reactive, and then the mother engages. And if the mother's voice was prosodic, like we're using for the stimulation, the baby's heart rates dropped 10 beats per minute or more. And the distress behaviors disappeared. If the mother still engaged, but her voice didn't have prosody, no effect on the behavior.
Mm-hmm.
Well, one of the things you talk about in the book, which is a great book if people are interested in this, I mean, there's the safe and sound protocol, and there's the way you use sound for this. But there are many other ways that cultures, many other techniques that we can use to activate that safety system to begin to bring down some of that dysregulation and chronic defensiveness. And maybe, did you want to say a little bit about that? And then I thought we had talked ahead of time, maybe I'll guide, because one way is through meditation. I can guide a very simple practice and then have Stephen deconstruct it based on what we're learning here.
So actually, Karen, in our book, put a whole series of practices that would be supportive. So she can describe.
If I could just say a little bit about the book, it weaves science together with story, which is a nice way to take things in. And the first part of the book really does talk about the importance of the autonomic nervous system to our mental and physical health. We talk about polyvagal theory. We talk about the SSP, the Safe and Sound Protocol, what it is, how it works. And then the last chapter of the first part is there are so many ways other than the SSP that we can calm ourselves, just like you were saying. Cultures around the world have created these things. And so we provide lots of examples, like humming and singing and breathing is really the best. We always have our breath with us, and you both know that. But then we created a toolbox for each of our states. Jeff, you were describing the states, a connected ventral state where we're social and engaged, a sympathetic state where we're activated, and then a shut down dorsal vagal state. So there are activities that you can do from each of those states to either, in a connected state, sort of hold on to that and savor that experience. In a sympathetic state, how to calm yourself down. And in a shut down state, to maybe come up through that ladder of getting a little more activation in the body so that you can eventually access safety. And then in the bonus pages of the book, we have many video practices that are provided to people that they can access as well. So that's addressing your question, Jeff. And just to finish talking about the book, the second part of the book is 13 in-depth case studies of using the SSP with such a broad and diverse range of symptoms. And yet the SSP has, in one way or another, worked its way through with the work with this client to, in some cases, have a transformational effect on that client's life. And the symptoms in those cases range from anxiety and depression to grief to addiction to dissociation, and even perfectionism is one of the topic of one of the cases. And they all work. The SSP has an effect on all of them because it's working at the brainstem level to calm the nervous system, to allow our body to relax and heal. Really for connection, change, and healing, which is the subtitle of our book.
Can you give us an anecdote about one of the addiction cases?
The addiction case was a really interesting one. The client had gone through the SSP twice before, and this time she was hoping to get just a little bit more of an effect on a sugar addiction that she had. And the SSP doesn't work because of your intentions or your belief or your effort. It goes to the nervous system and it affects the nervous system in the way the nervous system needs to be impacted. And in her case, she wasn't trying to address this, but she experienced dissociation as sort of a protective shield to protect herself from the outside world. And she was aware that that was happening, but it was so part of her natural day-to-day life. Well, in the process of doing SSP, her ability to dissociate actually disappeared. And so she suddenly had this new relationship with life where she didn't have this shield any longer. And ultimately, that's a very positive thing. And by the end of the experience, she made a great new friend. She felt more authentically herself in life. But it was a little bit of a rocky road as she tried to adjust to this new way of being.
Well, that's one of the things you talk about in the book, that you were having all the success with children, and then when you started rolling it out with adults, and it's worth saying here that this protocol has been explored by clinicians. It's just like hundreds and hundreds of clinicians around North America and the world have been like doing this and learning, getting feedback, and so it's really gotten out there. But anyway, you, in this feedback process with some of these clinicians that were doing it, we found out with some of the adults where people would receive benefits from it, but sometimes, and Stephen, you mentioned this earlier, when they got the signal for safety, instead of making them feel safe, it actually triggered, it was overwhelming. It triggered their fear and their trauma. And so can you say a little bit about that? Because we have these shields that we have for a reason, and
well, the reason our nervous system, let's say, co-ops a lot of information it gets. But let's sit back and kind of deal with this notion. I'm pulling my arms outward and I become accessible. Now, that's me, but if I have a severe trauma history and I'm in a state of hypervigilance, I'm now vulnerable.
That's right.
Yeah.
Okay, so the question is that difference between accessibility and vulnerability. And this became critical. Not having a severe trauma history, I really didn't understand the vulnerability. So I had to be taught from the users and from the providers. And it was quite a remarkable journey for me to understand what was going on, because the SSP, the design of it, the engineering of the acoustic works. It always works. The question is when the body gets triggered reflexively into that state of accessibility, the interoception of bodily feelings that are now going up to the brainstem and then up to the cortex. How are they interpreted based upon your history? So the SSP was working. The person reflexively became accessible, but their nervous system interpreted that accessibility as vulnerability. And that was very easily, let's say, understood, because when they were accessible, they were hurt. And they were often hurt by, let's say, people in their lives who were supposed to be there for them. And so the issue is, yeah, they reflexively became accessible, but they were injured and they learned. So trauma is like taste aversion. You eat poison food, you don't want to eat that food again. Trauma is a single trial learning episode as well. Our body experiences that and does not want to go back there. And that's what they were telling me. And so I had to go through this whole journey of understanding how a benign stimulus that was designed to make people connect and engage, how could it be hurtful in triggering people into these states? And I had to do a lot of reflection and understanding. But I will tell you that my own reaction was do no harm. And I didn't really want it out there with those types of populations. But the clinicians said, don't worry, Steve, we'll figure this out. You have a power tool. It's a power tool. Respect it. Now, this is the interesting part. To me, it wasn't a power tool because I didn't have those massive changes. To me, it was a calming state regulator. So I had to listen and I had to learn. And I had to make sure I didn't make the mistake of believing that my experiences were equivalent to others.
And I can see the parallel here. You probably have this as well. There's some people who are very open to meditation, and whether it's insight or whether it's like non-dual kind of experiencing the interconnectedness. And then other people, even people who want to, who like on the surface are interested in meditation. I hear so often, like, I'm afraid of what I'm going to find when I get there.
All the time.
All the time. And I think the more that I think of that and encounter people, that's where it comes down to like how good of a teacher you have, right? Because it's not hard as a beginner meditation teacher can bring people to what you're talking about, which is like a calm of nervous system and openness. But if you're coming in with a trauma history and you're encountering a teacher who can just bring you to calm, but can't kind of hold this container of extra layers of safety or show you how to find safety for yourself, it's actually just pretty kind of an abusive process.
Part of the difficulty with meditation with that population you're describing, the issue is the immobilization and often closing of the eyes, that when you hit that physiological state of accessibility, it flips right into vulnerability if you can't move. So the issue is it's very demanding, especially with those who have, let's say, severe trauma histories, to immobilize in the presence of others, and that's what you're asking them to do in general, with their eyes closed and people behind them. So now you have the body with its hypervigilance and its surveillance system saying, not going to give it up. So what happens is, even though they want to, they get into that and suddenly their body says, got to get out of here.
And it's so funny, like both of us, we've tried so many different kinds of meditation, and having a sensitized nervous system, I like to try things out and see how they land. In my particular lineage of meditation, which is Dzogchen, we meditate with the eyes open and kind of non-focus. And really what's happening in the nervous system is you're feeling your connectivity. You can even just seeing other people in the environment. There's a sense of being together with, practicing together with, and my eyes are not closed. So there's a kind of an erosion of boundary. You're feeling held by community, and it has such a different experience.
But other people have their eyes open and feel vulnerable.
Feel vulnerable
They
as well,
feel
yeah.
like someone's looking at them, and they feel like they want to close their eyes
Yeah.
to get safe.
Yeah.
Okay, well, this is really interesting. Well, just to
Let's
say,
try the practice.
we're
before
going
we
to do a practice because, first of all, I mean, those clinicians sort of solved it. They figured out that the way to address this was to titrate, was to slow down and less is more, and kind of do a little bit and then back up and a little bit more. And maybe we can talk about that in a second. But you gave me a really interesting idea for a practice to guide. You kind of set me up, both of you, Tasha and Stephen, for it to be impossible, because I'm trying to. What I try to do when I guide is, because I'm aware that there are many different kinds of nervous systems coming into it, I have been increasingly interested in how to adjust my guidance to accommodate very different kinds of, whether someone's got more of an ADHD profile or a trauma history, whatever it is. And I've adapted it. And now you can only adapt so much. You can't address every possible nervous system and every possible variable, because some of the ways of addressing it are then going to negate the other ones. But I thought I would guide a practice of just sort of settling and relaxing, but that starts with offering some options at the beginning to let people find their way in who might otherwise not find meditation that accessible. And then I'll kind of go into the settling. And then you can deconstruct it and tell me how successful I was. Stephen, it's like, oh God, this is not. Okay.
Don't screw
No
it up.
pressure. Just gonna guide Karen and Stephen Porges in a meditation practice, and all my listeners. So let's try this. So for everyone listening, this is going to be an opportunity to experience a little bit of meditation and settling, but then have a real expert comment on what's happening inside you as you're doing it, potentially. So I give people the choice right away, eyes open or closed. Some people like to have the eyes closed, creates a little more settling, or you can have them open, just sort of looking at the ground in front of you, the eyes soft. And, you're allowed to find your way into what comfort feels like for your body. So that might mean for some people, laying down feels like the right move. For others, just seated quietly on a couch or in your chair. And for others still, if you're feeling like you got a lot of energy, you're allowed to be standing up, to sway, even to move, to continue really doing a slow chore of some kind. There may be a natural movement that wants to happen, and that's totally allowed. So I like starting with a few slower breaths, just, and that to me is kind of, oh gosh, I have a body. I breathe. I forgot I breathe. Often just that noticing, sometimes a big breath comes in, we may realize we've been breathing a bit high in the chest. Slow and deliberate, noticing that a little bit of warmth on the inhale, maybe a little coolness of the nostril, whatever that sensation is, and then all the way into the belly. The belly gets a bit taut, and there's the release, the out breaths, like the letting go. And you can kind of ride that letting go down if you like, feeling the settling and noticing the contact with the ground under you that's supporting you. Now here it really becomes kind of what you feel like. You can just keep noticing the breath if that feels comfortable. That could be a nice way to get settled. All these things we could be paying attention to, our thoughts or worries. Instead, we just choose one thing out of that cacophony, and the other stuff doesn't have to go away. But we just highlight the sensation of the breath of the belly, say. Or maybe it doesn't feel so good to notice the breath, not so into that, but you could just listen to a sound. Background hum, the sound of birds, sound of your own breath. Or noticing tingles in your fingers, something grounded in the present moment. It's happening all on its own. Sounds coming all on their own, breath coming all on its own. Don't have to control anything or get anything right. And there's also an option here just to be. You don't even have to really tighten your focus around any one sensation if you don't want to. Just rest and be a body. Just noticing what you notice. Key understanding here is we're not trying to get anywhere. Just letting ourselves be where we already are. With attitude of acceptance, of kind of generosity towards our own bodies, caring quality even. Like, yeah, okay, just have this opportunity to take a break, to rest, to be with myself. And be with everyone else listening here too. I'll just be quiet for 30 seconds or so and let you settle how you want to settle, and then we'll round off this meditation. Just being a body. All right, friends, at your own pace. If you feel like opening your eyes, if they were closed, maybe wiggling your fingers. Very short meditation, but we're gonna come back into the conversation. And so, what did you pick up on that?
Okay, so very enjoyable. But let's talk about the process. The process starts with the intonations of the voice, the calmness of the voice. The second point that was important was the breath. And even though you didn't focus too much on it, breath, especially exhalation, functions like a vagal nerve stimulator. It calms us down. And you were playing around with trying to give the listener a point of focus. So you're, in a sense, because that's part of what I think is going on, that you need to have a point of focus. and you moved around from focus on the body to focus on other things. So the physiology of it was really, can you get the body into a more vagal state, which is calmer? Can you, in focus, get the mind not to be interpreting external stimuli to, in a sense, recruit your metabolic resources to move, to fight, to flee, to disrupt? So it's like you're tuning the system just to be. And so it was very effective, very nice.
I also noticed that you did three things that the nervous system loves. You gave us context, what we were going to be doing and what it would be like. Maybe you gave us choice, eyes open, eyes closed, a number of choices along the way. And then connection, which Steve was just mentioning about your voice. And I can tell that all of us are a little more quiet or slow or calm in some way. It was a really nice meditation.
Well, that's one of the thing I'm always aware of when I'm guiding a practice is not giving people too many options, but some options. In the bad old days of meditation was like, there was one way to do it. You do it right. And if you're not doing it this way, it's wrong. And it has to be the breath. It has to look like this. And a lot of people don't like focusing on the breath, particularly if they have a trauma history or, whatever it is, the way their nervous system's organized. So you want to be able to offer a few options in a kind of calm way, but then you don't want to offer so many options that then the mind gets activated and starts going, I don't know if I'm doing it right, and then that prevents them from accessing the state as well. So you're always trying to find that kind of balance. And it changes, honestly, depending on the person and the context, but you do the best you can.
And it's relational as well, right? Like as you're in relationship with the person you're guiding, so they're bringing whatever happened in that day or what they're able to be open to.
Yeah.
So I want to actually go back to something Karen said. And by giving people options or telling them what it was going to be about, the uncertainty is reduced. So predictability is what our nervous system craves. Predictability is literally a neural metaphor for safety. So by the language you were using, there was no large gap of uncertainty for the nervous system to step into.
It's amazing. And so when you look at the landscape of different practices and through your lens, are they all just looking to help us find settling and connection? Is that really, in a sense, what, if you had to squint your eyes, because it does seem like that so many of us are not in that.
Okay, so I kind of build this model in my mind that there are two different domains of co-regulation. One in which we are co-regulating with what's outside of us, the world or connection. And the other one is co-regulation between our higher brain structures and our body. And I think there are different strategies of exercising those loops. And what I think meditation gives us is a lot for that latter one, the ability, in a sense, to feel safe enough in the context to give up our hypervigilance so that we can now allow our body and our brain to talk to each other and come to some harmonic sense of acceptance of each other.
Well, it's amazing. I mean, the work you do is so important. And I mean, the big picture of this is there's so much chronic mental health struggle and so much trauma out there and so much people not speaking over each other and not hearing each other. And, offer a bit of big picture for us around how, if you had a hopeful vision of how not just this technology, but the underlying understanding of the kind of polyvagal understanding, how it
Fix
might
society for us, basically.
fix it all.
You see, we first, by saying we don't fix, we allow our nervous systems to calibrate and to regulate. And so much of society is about fixing without understanding what's going on underneath the hood. So what I am really saying is that once we honor what the body is doing and learn what it evolved to do, we become a healthier individual and a healthier society. And the future is really functionally listening to what our body is telling us and understanding what those messages are. And the messages are unambiguous. Our bodies are screaming at us. It's basically saying, you are killing us. And that's almost an option. We have taken the option to kill ourselves by creating narratives that are all about turning off our feedback loops to either acquire material or to inhibit our bodily needs. And we create a set of structures in our society that reward the inhibition of what our body needs to do. Sometimes it just needs to be, just to sit in a safe environment. And so we tend to think feeling safe is optional when it is the primary obligatory feature of what it is to be a human. I do have one thing to say on all this. We evolved to have this remarkable nervous system that was literally designed to trust others, to connect and to trust others. And that's why there's so much trauma, is because those trusts have been violated. That's what we're reacting to. But we're reacting to a nervous system that evolves. It's benevolent and a generous nervous system and wants to act accordingly. And that is part of what we need to respect and need to help our culture enable us to be who we really are, which is a benevolent and generous species.
That's so hopeful. I love that.
It is. So what that look like practically? Is it about teaching the body and education, starting from primary school, like connecting kids to practices to know themselves, to regulate, and then having that be a priority in the rest of the culture? I mean,
let's deconstruct that a little bit more, because that's on the inside of one. What we're really saying is our nervous systems evolved to do marvelous things if we are in context in which we are trusting of other. So it is a societal responsibility. And the societal responsibility is to structure context for this benevolent, generous species to literally become what it can become, including it can be a great problem solver. So we can't solve problems when we're locked into states of threat. We can't be benevolent. We can't care about anyone else. So our basic mandate of being connected with others is compromised once we get frightened, once we're under threat.
I'm such a Pollyanna. I'm always also looking for the hopeful side of things. What can we do from here? And feeling safe is such a powerful remedy for dysregulation. We're experiencing a lot of dysregulation in the world, and dysregulation is highly contagious, but so is regulation. So if we can feel safe ourselves, then our state affects other people's states, and we can hope that that will just continue to ripple outwards. And that's what, for me at least, that's all I feel I can do in my little box here.
So tell us about where we can find the book. Is it out already?
So you can get it on Sounds True is our publisher, and you can get it on their website, and you can also find it on Amazon. And if you're interested in polyvagal theory, we have an institute, the Polyvagal Institute, polyvagalinstitute.com, where you can find loads of resources and courses and connection around polyvagal theory and polyvagal applications in the world.
That's wonderful.
well, this has been a really inspiring conversation. And I know I'm taking with me just that last thing you said, Karen, about safety, and what something you said, Stephen, about when you're feeling safe, then you feel like solutions are accessible. Then you can that's the best place to problem solve. And imagine all of these world's nervous systems where there's so much potential creativity that is not being, tapped into. But if we can create a culture of more safety through these kinds of practices, through prioritizing that in education and these bigger picture social institutions, then we're best able to address our challenges. And I mean, that's something to aim for. So thanks for helping to be, the architects, at least one part of that.
Thank you.
Thanks.
And cut. Thanks for adventuring with us. Pop over to mindbodpod.com and let us know in the comments how this episode landed for you. Don't forget to subscribe for new episodes every week. And if you want to support our crazy adventures, get fun perks and exclusives along the way, join us as a paid subscriber. See you next week.